Hi everyone, I'm Jon Erickson, one of the speakers for day one of our short course in ecological economics. I'm a faculty member at the University of Vermont, where I hold the Blittersdorf Professorship in Sustainability Science and Policy. I also teach ecological economics at both the graduate and undergraduate level in the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. And I'm a longtime fellow of the Gund Institute for Environment, where we do and specialize in ecological economics. So I thought I'd kick things off with a little bit of a primer, if you will, a little bit of a thought experiment to get us thinking about the need for an ecological economics in this day and age, the dimensions of what that might look like. For a reading today, I've provided chapter 1 of a new book that I have coming out this fall with Island Press. The book is called The Progress Illusion: Reclaiming Our Future from the Fairytale of Economics. And the book kind of helps frame both this first day of our course together, but really the course overall. So I thought I'd do an exercise that comes right out of my own teaching at the University of Vermont and in one of the early chapters of the book, where I sort of frame the kind of dimensions of an ecological economics. So let's jump right in. If you have a piece of paper, it might be helpful because you can do the exercise that I'm going to describe as we go through this primer together. So as I mentioned, I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses in ecological economics at the University of Vermont in the northeastern United States. When I teach my large undergrad class, usually 70 or 80 students in a big lecture hall, I often start with a where do you stand exercise. So you can play along if you like. If you get a piece of paper, draw a line across the paper, and on the one side of the line, this is what we do on the blackboard, write strongly agree, then maybe 20% over on the line, write agree, in the middle neutral, then the next step disagree, and then on the far right hand side strongly disagree. So you've got a kind of continuum of opinion. And we draw this up on the blackboard early in the class. And what I do then is ask the students to all stand up, and then I either read or put up on a slide a series of statements. And I ask them to vote with their feet across the rows of the lecture hall. So the first statement, write this down and decide yourself where you stand along the agree to disagree spectrum. The first statement is economic growth and environmental protection are fundamentally in conflict with one another. Let me repeat that and you can jot it down. Economic growth and environmental protection are fundamentally in conflict with one another. So you can pause the video, think through that, mark down on that spectrum from strongly agree to strongly disagree where you would stand on that particular statement. So when I do this in a class, after round one of the shuffling settles, a predictable kind of bell-shaped curve materializes, right? And now the fun really begins because I ask the students why they stand where they do, including an invitation to walk their opinion elsewhere in the room if they're otherwise persuaded by their colleagues. So let's unpack this first statement. Very often, students in the disagree tail of the distribution often concede that growth as currently measured has some degree of conflict with environmental protection, but argue that it's not, quote, fundamental, right? And I chose that word in particular to kind of get them thinking. They give examples of an economy growing in clean and green ways through renewable energy, ecotourism, or the service sector more generally. Someone usually claims that demand for environmental protection comes with higher incomes, and that low-income people, low-income communities, or entire countries must first grow to deal with the very impacts of that growth. The conclusion from this side of the room is that economics and economies can grow in more efficient ways to limit environmental impact. There is a greener way. Okay, that's one side of the room. The big clump in the middle they want more clarification, especially over the word fundamentally. They'd like to redefine growth as something else, perhaps citing an example of beyond GDP discussed maybe in an environmental studies class at the University of Vermont. Someone might quote a vague recollection of the Brundtland Commission or mention the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but admit they've never really thought about the hand-waving of the sustainability discourse. Remember, these aren't economics students or business students or students for any particular major. These are students from all across campus, very often students studying environment, but without any formal training in economics. This middle group, they want the benefits of growth, but not its costs. Yet they struggle with whether growing the economy forever, however defined, is possible and even desirable. There must be a middle way. Then there's the agree side. To them, especially the outlier to hugging the classroom wall, right? To them, growth is growth. They argue that if an economy is growing, it must be further depleting and polluting a finite planet. Someone might counter the green growth argument from the other side of the room with the rebound effect, where efficiency makes resources cheaper per unit, but this ultimately leads to more depletion and more pollution. So an efficient machine might use half as much energy and so run twice as much time. Also, higher incomes may demand cleaner local environments, but continue to demand pollution-intensive goods from abroad. It's certainly been the experience in the United States. Green growth at a planetary scale, according to this side of the room, is an illusion. There is no away, right, with your waste. We need not a greener way, not a middle way, but a new way. So, this is round one of our classroom exercise, right? And it opens up a whole series of questions to explore in the weeks ahead, and I hope that we'll explore in this short course together. There are empirical questions about the possibility and desirability of green growth, the Shangri-La, if you will, of sustainable development. There are scientific questions about the Earth's capacity to provide resources and absorb waste at the current size of the global economy, let alone something much bigger. There are ethical questions about who benefits from the growth model, who pays the costs, and whether our single species should make more room for the rest of life on Earth. So these discussions lead to the next statement to consider. So if you're playing along, jot down this statement. There should be a limit to the amount of money that an individual can earn in today's society. So let me say it again. There should be a limit to the amount of money that an individual can earn in today's society. So pause the video, reflect on that a bit. So reactions to round two are visibly more personal, at least in the students in the classroom and the state of Vermont, as students confidently reshuffle to their new stance. A bell-shaped curve materializes again, but in a typical class, it's more skewed to the agree side. The side that disagrees offers the usual cultural norms of a capitalist society. Limits on earnings subdue motivation, inhibit entrepreneurship, stifle innovation. If you work hard, take risks, and play by the rules, then you deserve every penny you earn. It's the equality of opportunity that matters, not of outcome. Those who strongly disagree tend to be quite skeptical about who would set these limits on income and how. And besides, don't millionaires and billionaires give lots of their money away to charitable causes? These are the arguments that we often hear on the disagree side. The majority in the middle, again, all right, these are undergraduate students in a new class trying to figure things out. They want more clarity, especially on the word limit. If there are soft limits, such as a progressive tax structure with higher incomes paying higher tax rates, some would drift over to the agree side. If hard limits included an imposed cap on income, many in my classroom would join the disagree camp. Someone often argues that society's focus should instead be on lifting the unfortunate up from the bottom, not unfairly punishing the successful at the top. Could we better incentivize the wealthy to support just causes with their hard-won earnings? Okay, that's the middle. The proportion of students who agree with limiting income usually dive into, in the US, what we would call the 1% narrative, right? This side is troubled with growing inequality in the United States and around the world. They often want to unpack the word earn, as I do, yet let the individual keep earned income from the sweat of their brow, as Josh Farley would say, but not capture the unearned returns from the work of others, investments of society, and resources of the environment. Billionaires are only possible in an unjust society, this side of the room would argue. Why should the tiniest fraction of the 1% decide whether and how to spend unearned income on tax-deductible causes? So, this second round opens a discussion on what is fair and unfair in society. There are biological questions about the capacity of our social primate species to both compete and cooperate. There are institutional questions at the intersection of law, governance, and culture that determine which attributes of human behavior will be selected and reinforced. There are political questions over who exactly is served by an old economics of narrow self-interest and white privilege versus a new economics of community well-being and reciprocity. So these first two stances are about the sustainable size and fairness of an economic system, themes that we'll explore together in this short course. They are, admittedly, well outside the purview of most economics classes. However, the final statement is squarely within the realm of a self-proclaimed science of choice. Okay, so write down this final statement if you're playing along. It's a short one. Free markets will ultimately solve our environmental problems. Okay, write that down again. Free markets will ultimately solve our environmental problems. Sorry, my dog is slurping water over here. Hey, Wilson. So pause the video, reflect on that. Okay. So the march to the disagree side of the room this time is very determined, with a clear majority of Vermont students quick to dismiss free markets as the panacea to environmental problem solving. They voice concerns over alignment of short-term for-profit motives with long-term for-planet interests. Some want to believe that voting with their dollars can make a difference, but are skeptical that consumer choice alone will solve the climate or extinction crises. If I replace will ultimately with can help, then the bell-shaped curve materializes again. So, the folks in the middle on this statement want clarification, again, right, over the word free. Does free imply absence of any and all government oversight? Let the market do its thing, but within clear boundaries set by society. That's what they're arguing for. Voting by ballot must take precedence over voting by billfold, right? By dollar. The center of the room wants to strike a balance between the invisible hand of the market with the invisible handshake of social norms and the invisible foot of government. Now, if I strike the word free to further modify the statement to markets can help, not free markets, but markets can help, more heads tend to bob in agreement. Yeah, like markets can help, but they're not the panacea. Now, rarely does somebody strongly advocate, at least in Vermont, for a purely free market approach, although occasionally a student steps out from under the peer pressure and makes the case. The agreed position here usually stems more from distrust of government than from blind faith in markets. In a 20-year-old's voice, a 19-year-old's voice, I can hear a parent raised on Reaganisms, as I was, in a culture that claims government rarely solves anything. If I replace free markets in this statement with government, the disagree side of the room barely budges, and any proponents of market-based solutions eagerly join their colleagues. So, this third and final statement leads to questions over the dichotomy, right, of market and government. This opens up rich discussions over the right scale of governance, the design of checks and balances in both private and public spheres, and a topic near and dear to my heart, the role of education in informing civic duty in a global society, another major theme of this short course together. As an economics of I has crowded out a civics education of we, there is no shortage of questioning and rethinking our culture's bedtime stories. As one of my favorite novelists and science fiction writers, Ursula Le Guin, wrote to her own students, quote, "There are no right answers to wrong questions," end quote. So the hope is that these polarizing statements inspire questions worth asking in building a new economics. Asking what minimum size of an economic system is needed to support flourishing livelihoods in an interdependent web of life is the right question. Question that Kate Radworth will be asking on one of our days. Likewise, asking what's fair and unfair in our economic relationships should preclude any delusions that just outcomes will just magically emerge from a narrow model of self-interest. Now, the answers in this short course won't be precise XY coordinates on a blackboard, but surely the wrong question is how to make markets more efficient to merely slow planetary destruction. The answers won't conform to a single story from a chosen people. But surely the wrong question is how to sustain an economy that serves the wants of the few by forsaking the needs of the many. The answers won't be grow the economy to nearly every question asked, but surely doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result is, as Alcoholics Anonymous is reported to have said, a kind of insanity. So that's a little bit of an introduction to some of the themes that we'll cover in this short course. It's a piece of the puzzle that I discuss in my book, The Progress Illusion. Hopefully you'll have time to dive into the first chapter of that book before our first day together and use these questions and these frames as a way of thinking through the pros and cons of the things that you'll hear this week from a variety of different perspectives. We're really looking forward to engaging with you over these 4 days. And Rigo Melgar, who's our chief organizer and brains behind the operation here, has organized a fabulous slate of speakers and some discussion topics and some opportunities to break out, join together, and talk through these difficult questions. So we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.